The gunshot came without warning. One moment, the room was filled with crystal glasses and careful conversation. The next, the guards were down, the exits were sealed, and a man in a dark suit was raising his weapon across the floor of the estate, aimed at the chest of Bak Min-Gyu, one of the most feared men on the southern coast of Korea. No one moved. No one except her. She had been in that compound for 93 days. She had scrubbed his floors. She had endured every punishment he devised. She had stood before him in silence when he ordered her to speak, and she had said nothing, not once, not ever. And in the space between the trigger pull and the impact, she crossed the room, grabbed the lapel of his shirt and put her body between him and the bullet. He caught her when she fell. He stood there, this man who had never been caught off guard, never been shaken, never held anything with anything other than control, and he held her, and he had no words. This is the story of what she knew that he didn't, and the truth that changed everything. Before we continue this thrilling story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Where are you watching from? Like, comment and share. The Bak estate sat 12 kilometers outside the city centre, where the coastal road narrowed and the properties behind their walls stopped bothering to explain themselves. It was not the kind of place that appeared on maps people shared willingly. The guards at the outer gate wore plain clothes and carried nothing visible. The stone floors inside had been polished to the kind of finish that reflects everything and forgives nothing. Every person in that house moved with the particular carefulness of someone who understood, without being told twice, that the wrong step had consequences. Esther arrived on a Tuesday. She came through the service entrance with a folder of agency paperwork and a single bag that weighed almost nothing. Mrs. O, the head of household staff, met her at the door and walked her through the rules the way someone recites a list they have memorized too many times, quickly, without warmth, watching for the reaction. The reaction told you everything about whether someone would last. Esther listened, she nodded, she asked no questions. Mrs. O studied her for a moment longer than usual, then showed her to the staff quarters. That evening, Esther moved through her first shift in the East Wing with the quiet efficiency of someone who had worked in difficult houses before. She set tables. She carried trays. She did not look at anything for longer than the task required. Or so it appeared. She had, in fact, already counted the guards on the ground floor rotation, noted the camera blind spot at the far end of the main corridor, and identified 3 men who had arrived for a dinner meeting and whose faces did not match the staff directory she had memorized before walking through the gate. She filed each detail carefully and let her expression show nothing. It was across that corridor, the long one connecting the kitchen to the formal dining room, that Bak Min-Gyu first saw her. He was returning from the meeting, 2 of his men behind him, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never needed to rush because the world around him had always adjusted its pace to his. He glanced down the corridor out of habit, the way a man checks every room he passes without consciously deciding to. He saw her. She was carrying a tray. She did not look up. She did not adjust her pace or straighten her posture or perform the small, reflexive gestures of acknowledgement that every other person in that building produced automatically in his presence. She simply continued walking, as if the corridor belonged equally to both of them. He said nothing, he kept moving. But something had registered, a small, precise disturbance in the machinery of a mind that ran on total familiarity with its environment. Everyone in that house was knowable, predictable, arranged. She was not arranged. By the end of the first week, he had watched her 3 more times without meaning to. She never noticed or gave no sign of noticing, which in his world amounted to the same problem. He told himself it was a security concern. He told himself she simply needed watching. What he did not tell himself, because he had not yet found the language for it, was that she was the first person to walk through his door in years who did not seem afraid of what was behind it. It started with a glass. Esther had set it 2 inches to the left of where Min-Gyu's house standards required. Whether it was a test or a genuine observation, she was never told. The consequence was an additional 4 hours of work after the rest of the staff had been dismissed, alone in the dining room, repolishing surfaces that were already clean. She did it without comment. The following week, it was eye contact. She had held his gaze for slightly longer than the unwritten rule permitted when he passed her in the main corridor. 3 days of kitchen duty were added to her rotation, the hardest shift, beginning before dawn, ending well after the evening meal. She did that without comment too. The staff watched with the helpless attention of people witnessing something they cannot stop and dare not name. They had seen difficult arrivals before. They had seen people broken down by this house, its silence, its pressure, the particular atmosphere that came from living inside the orbit of a man who treated control as a form of oxygen. Most people lasted a few weeks before something in them quietly collapsed. Jaewon, one of the younger maids, caught Esther's eye across the hallway on the morning of the 3rd week and mouthed a single word. "Run." Esther looked at her evenly, the way someone looks at a warning they have already considered and set aside. Then she turned back to her work. What no one in that house could see, what nothing in her posture or expression revealed, was what Esther was doing inside the silence they mistook for endurance. She was working. Every room she entered was a data point. Every schedule change, every rotation of guards, every face that appeared at the gate after nightfall and left before the household woke, she held it all precisely, without writing a single thing down. She had been trained to carry information the way other people carry breath, quietly, continuously, without it ever showing on the surface. By the end of the 3rd week, Min-Gyu called her into his study. The room was designed with the particular intentionality of a space meant to establish hierarchy before a word was spoken. The desk was large and positioned so that whoever sat behind it occupied the light, and whoever stood before it did not. The chair on the visitor's side was lower than it appeared. He let her stand for a long moment before he looked up. Then he said, with the flat precision of a man who expected immediate compliance, "Speak." She looked at him, her hands were still at her sides. Her expression was composed, not defiant, not afraid, not performing either, simply present, a stillness that had weight to it. She said nothing. The silence in the room became a different kind of silence, the kind that arrives when something expected fails to happen and no one is sure what comes next. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, then he dismissed her with a single motion of his hand. She left without hurrying. Behind her, the men who had been standing at the edges of the room did not look at Min-Gyu's face. They had learned, long ago, that there were expressions he wore that it was safer not to witness. His jaw was tight. The glass on his desk remained untouched for the rest of the afternoon. There was a bathroom on the 3rd floor that no one used. The window faced north, away from the courtyard cameras, and the ventilation produced enough ambient noise to cover the sound of a transmission lasting under 90 seconds. Esther used it every 3 days. She had, by this point, identified 2 offshore financial conduits running through shell companies registered in Singapore and Cyprus. She had the name and schedule of the man who moved Min-Gyu's more sensitive communications, a fixer named Kwon Dejung, compact and unhurried, with the kind of face that was easy to overlook and had clearly been cultivated that way. She had the internal hierarchy mapped to 3 levels of depth. Her handler received each transmission and confirmed receipt with a single coded response. The mission, by every measurable standard, was progressing, but something had begun to trouble her in a way she could not yet transmit, because she could not yet prove it. The intelligence briefing she had been given before entering the compound described a specific pattern of violence, 3 incidents, attributed directly to Min-Gyu's personal authorization, spanning a period of 14 months. She had built her internal timeline carefully, cross-referencing the dates against what she could reconstruct from household records, staff tenure, and the architectural evidence of how the estate had been used. The security wing had been expanded. Certain rooms had been repurposed. The timeline did not align. Not slightly, fundamentally. She filed the discrepancy in the part of her mind, reserved for things that required more information before they required action, and she continued her work. It was around this time that Hana began to make herself known. Hana had been at the estate for 2 years and occupied the particular position of someone who had never been given an official title because her role was not official in nature. She was perceptive, well-dressed, and had developed a precise understanding of how to exist within Min-Gyu's orbit without ever directly challenging it. She was also, Esther noted, exceptionally good at identifying threats that others hadn't yet recognized as threats. The additional assignments started quietly. A shift moved without notice, a task reassigned at the last moment that left Esther covering 2 floors alone, Small frictions, each one individually explainable, collectively forming a pattern. Esther absorbed each one and adjusted without complaint. She understood what Hana was doing. She also understood that Hana was not entirely wrong to do it, which made the situation more interesting than it was inconvenient. What Esther did not know, could not have known, because it happened in a room she did not have access to, was the conversation that took place on a Thursday evening in the south-facing office between Min-Gyu and Kwon Dee-jung. It lasted 6 minutes. Min-Gyu spoke for approximately 45 seconds of it. He did not raise his voice, he did not need to. He gave Kwon the name of the staffing agency that had sent Esther, the date of her arrival, and a single instruction: find out everything. Kwon nodded and left. Min-Gyu remained at the window for a moment after the door closed, looking out at the courtyard where the evening shift was changing. His expression gave nothing away. But he was watching. He had, without fully acknowledging it to himself, been watching for some time. The library was the one room in the estate that did not feel designed to impress anyone. The rest of the house operated as a statement: clean lines, expensive surfaces, the architecture of a man who understood that environment shapes perception. But the library was smaller than its position in the floor plan suggested it should be, and the books on its shelves were not arranged for appearance. They were arranged the way books get arranged when someone has actually read them, moved them, returned them to slightly different positions over years. It was past midnight when Min-Gyu walked in and found Esther standing at the far shelf. She had a book open in her hands, not skimming, reading, with the particular quality of attention that belongs to someone who has found the specific passage they were looking for. She was still in her uniform, which meant she had not yet gone to the staff quarters, which meant she had chosen to be here instead. She did not startle when he entered. She did not close the book quickly or manufacture an expression of apology. She simply became aware of him, finished the line she was reading, and closed the book with the unhurried care of someone returning something borrowed. She placed it back on the shelf, exactly where she had found it. Then she turned to leave. He said, "You know how to read." The words were out before he had decided to say them. They landed in the room with the particular awkwardness of a sentence that had meant to be something else and arrived as something considerably less. He recognized it immediately, the absurdity of it, the way it revealed more about his own unsettlement than anything about her. She paused. She looked at him just once directly for the length of a single breath, and something moved through her expression. It was not mockery, it was not warmth, it was something quieter than either and more unsettling than both, something that in a different context between different people might have been called amusement. Then she walked past him and was gone. He stood in the library for a long time. He looked at the shelf where the book had been replaced. He looked at the exact position she had left it, which was, he realized slowly, the same position it had occupied for the better part of 15 years. Not approximately, exactly. He did not take the book down. He was not sure he wanted to know what page she had been reading. 3 floors above, in the narrow privacy of the north-facing bathroom, Esther opened the data file her handler had transmitted 2 hours earlier. She had expected a routine update. What she found instead was a photograph, a document and a date. The document was 11 years old. It was a covert operations order, classified at a level that should have made its existence impossible to access. It authorized a targeted killing. It listed a location, a method and a name. The name was Bak Min-Gyu, Min-Gyu's father. And at the bottom of the order, in the space reserved for authorizing signature, was a name she recognized, a name from her own organization, a name she had trusted without question for 7 years. She stood very still for a long time. Outside, the coastal wind moved through the dark, and the estate kept its silence, and somewhere below her, in a library full of books that belonged to no one who had ordered them built, a man stood alone and could not explain why he felt, for the first time in years, that something in his house had quietly shifted. It was not Hana. Esther had considered Hana carefully, the deliberate friction, the repositioned schedules, the way she managed proximity to Min-Gyu with the precision of someone protecting an investment. It would have been a reasonable conclusion. It was the wrong one. The confirmation came on a Wednesday, through a pattern so small that anyone not specifically trained to look for it would have looked past it entirely. Kwon Dejung made a phone call from the East Courtyard at 6:47 in the morning, an unremarkable thing for a fixer to do. But the call lasted 4 minutes, and when Esther cross-referenced it against the timeline she had been building, it landed 11 minutes after an internal security memo had been distributed to only 6 people in the organization. She checked it twice. Then she understood. Kwon had been feeding the Chungsan group for 18 months, meeting locations, financial transfers, the movement of key personnel. He had been doing it quietly, consistently, and from a position of such complete trust that no one had thought to look at him. People rarely looked at the person closest to the center. That proximity felt like proof of loyalty. It wasn't. The gala was in 5 days. Esther had already noted it on the household calendar, a gathering of allied networks, hosted at the estate, the kind of event that required weeks of preparation and produced exactly the kind of controlled chaos that professional killers preferred to work inside. Too many people, too many moving pieces, and one man who would be expected to stand in the same position in the same room at a predictable hour. The contract on Min-Gyu's life was not theoretical, it was scheduled. She sat with that knowledge for a long time. The calculation was not complicated. If she transmitted what she knew to her handler, the network would receive it, assess it, and do nothing to prevent it. A clean outcome, a closed file. She would be extracted within 48 hours, and the gala would proceed exactly as the Chungsan group intended. Her organization, she now understood, had reasons of their own to want this particular ending. If she intervened without authorization, she burned everything. Her cover, her mission, 7 years of operational credibility, and she would be doing it for a man who had spent 3 months devising new ways to make her life in his house more difficult. She thought about the document, the date, the signature. She thought about a boy who had inherited an empire at 26, because the people who trained her had decided his father needed to die. Then she began to move. It took her 3 days. A small adjustment to the invitation routing that shifted 2 guests and opened a gap in the room's eastern flank. A quiet word in the right ear that changed one guard rotation by 30 minutes. An anonymous note, routed through 3 untraceable steps, that gave Min-Gyu a reason to stand 12 feet further from the window than protocol would normally place him. 12 feet was the difference between a clean shot and a missed one. She did not report any of it to her handler. She did not explain it to anyone. She simply acted. And then she set her tray on its shelf and went back to work, and her face showed nothing, and the line she had just crossed disappeared silently behind her like a door with no handle on the other side. The estate had been transformed by the time the first guests arrived. The main hall ran the length of the ground floor, and whoever had designed it had understood that power announced itself through scale. Tonight it held crystal and candlelight, and the particular atmosphere that forms when dangerous people dress well and pretend, for an evening, that their world operates by the same conventions as everyone else's. Conversations were measured. Laughter arrived precisely on cue. No one said anything that mattered within earshot of anyone they hadn't known for at least a decade. Esther moved through it with a tray and complete stillness. She had worn the same uniform for 93 days. She had learned to become part of the room's architecture, present enough to serve, invisible enough to be forgotten the moment she turned a corner. Tonight she used that invisibility the way she had been trained to use every available resource. She read the room in layers. The first pass, exits, sightlines, the positions of the 6 men she had identified as Min-Gyu's active security for the evening. 2 were already slightly out of position. Someone had moved them. The second pass, faces, most she recognized, one she didn't. He was standing near the east wall with a drink he hadn't touched. The suit was correct for the occasion in every way except one. It pulled fractionally across the left shoulder, the fabric straining in the specific manner of a garment, fitted without accounting for what was worn beneath it. His posture was patient, controlled, the posture of someone waiting for a clock to reach a number, not a conversation to reach a conclusion. He wasn't a guest. She found Kwon 12 seconds later. He was positioned near the side corridor, slightly apart from the nearest cluster of conversation, his right hand at his side. He glanced at his watch with the practiced casualness of a man trying very hard to appear unhurried. Then she found Min-Gyu. He was across the room, exactly where her anonymous note had placed him, 12 feet from the window, jaw set, moving through an exchange with two men whose body language suggested they wanted something he had not yet decided to give them. He was in full armor, composed, completely unaware. She was already recalculating. The glass broke at the far end of the hall. It was a clean distraction, sharp, social, drawing the automatic attention of everyone in the room, including the two guards nearest to Min-Gyu, who turned instinctively toward the sound. Kwon moved toward the corridor exit without looking back. The man by the east wall reached inside his jacket. Esther was already moving. She covered the distance in the spaces between other people's reactions, the tray gone, her path direct and invisible until it wasn't. She reached Min-Gyu in the gap between the click of the mechanism and the shot itself, her hand closing on the lapel of his shirt, her body turning him away from the window, away from the line, and the bullet found her left shoulder instead of his chest. The sound was very loud. The pain arrived a half-second later, white and total. She stayed on her feet, 4 seconds. She needed only one long enough to see his face, which had come apart entirely. The composure was gone. The armor was gone. His eyes were wide and his lips were parted, and he looked, for the first time in all the months she had watched him, like someone who did not know what to do. Then her knees gave way beneath her. His arms caught her before she reached the floor. His hands, which had never held anything she had witnessed with anything resembling gentleness, held her now with a terror so complete and unconcealed that it was almost unbearable to be the one receiving it. The marble was cold against her legs. The room smelled of gunpowder and extinguished candles. And Bak Min-Gyu, who had built his entire existence on the certainty that he controlled every variable in his world, knelt on the floor of his own estate and held the woman he had punished for 93 days and could not find a single word. The physician worked for 40 minutes. Min-Gyu sat outside the door for all of it. He did not pace. He did not make calls. He sat in the chair someone had placed in the corridor at some point in the estate's history for reasons that had never mattered until now, and he was still in his gala clothes, and there was blood on his shirt that was not his own, and he did not move. His security chief delivered updates at intervals. The assassin had been detained. The guests had been managed. The evening's damage had been contained to the degree that such things could be contained. Kwon was gone. That information arrived last, delivered with the particular careful neutrality of someone conveying news they know will detonate. Kwon had been seen leaving through the service exit 14 seconds after the shot. His apartment had already been emptied. 18 months, the security chief said quietly, was the current estimate for how long the intelligence had been flowing outward. 18 months of meetings attended, routes travelled, decisions made, all of it passed through hands Min-Gyu had never once thought to question. He said nothing. He nodded once and the security chief understood he was dismissed. When the physician emerged and told him she was stable, Min-Gyu stood, straightened his jacket with the automatic precision of a man whose habits ran deeper than his current state, and walked to the staff quarters. He told himself he was looking for an explanation. Her room was small and ordered with a neatness that went beyond the requirements of the position. The single bag she had arrived with was stored beneath the bed. There was nothing on the surfaces that wasn't functional, no photographs, no personal effects of the ordinary kind. He found the documents in the lining of the bag, folded, flat, precisely placed. He sat on the edge of the bed and read everything. The mission brief, the intelligence file, the financial records his network had been traced through, the list of charges being built against him, some of which he recognized, some of which described actions he had never taken and decisions he had never made. Then the photograph. Then the document beneath it. He read the authorization order 3 times. He read the date. He read the location. He read the name at the bottom, the name that belonged to the organization that had sent this woman into his house, and he understood, with a completeness that arrived slowly and then all at once, that the men who had come for him tonight were not the first people to have arranged for a member of his family to die. The room was very quiet. He had carried the grief of his father's death for 11 years as a fact about the world, brutal, specific, the foundational wound around which he had built everything that came after. The empire, the control, the refusal to be surprised by anything again. He sat with the document in his hands and understood that the foundation had been constructed on ground that someone else had broken. He sat alone in that room for a long time. Then he set the papers down carefully, rose, and walked back down the corridor to where she was. She became aware of the room before she opened her eyes. The quality of the silence told her she was still inside the estate, not a hospital, not an extraction point. The smell of the physician's antiseptic, the particular weight of the air that belonged to this house, and something else, a presence in the room that was not medical staff and was not absence. She opened her eyes. He was sitting in the chair beside the bed, not at a distance, not standing in the doorway with the architecture of the room arranged to his advantage the way she had watched him position himself in every interaction she had witnessed, sitting in a plain chair with no desk between them and no men at the edges of the room. The mission documents were on the small table to her left, stacked with the neat edges of someone who had handled them carefully. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said one word. "Why?" It was a simpler question than she had expected from him, and perhaps a more honest one. She had prepared in the abstract way she prepared for most things, for anger, for interrogation, for the particular cold precision he used when he wanted to reduce something to its components. She had not prepared for this, a single syllable delivered quietly, in a room with no audience, by a man who appeared to have been sitting in that chair for some time. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke. It was the first time he had heard her voice. She registered the slight shift in his expression when she did, something that moved through him and was quickly contained, but not quickly enough. She told him the truth, not all of it, enough. She told him about the mission, its original terms, its actual purpose. She told him what she had found inside his compound that did not match the intelligence she had been given. She told him about the document, the photograph, the name she recognized at the bottom of the authorization order. She told him what she had understood when those pieces assembled themselves into a complete picture, that the organization she had served for 7 years had reasons of its own for wanting this particular outcome, and that those reasons stretched back further than the gala, further than her assignment, further than the 18 months Kwon had spent feeding information to their rivals. She told him what she had chosen and why. She did not apologize for the mission. It would have been dishonest, and she had not come this far to be dishonest. She did not ask for anything. She told him what had happened with the same unflinching directness she had maintained in his house for 93 days, and she met his eyes while she did it, and she did not look away. When she finished, the room held its silence. He was still for a long moment. Then he said with a flatness that was not coldness but something closer to disbelief, "You should have let them take me." "I know," she said. The silence returned. Then she said, "I almost did." He looked at her. She looked at him. The documents sat between them on the table, unburned, unresolved, belonging now to whatever came next. For the first time since she had walked through his gate, there was nothing in the room that he controlled. The decision that mattered most had already been made, and she had been the one to make it. He knew it, she knew he knew it. Neither of them looked away. The days that followed moved with the particular efficiency of a man who had learned long ago that stillness was a luxury and momentum was armor. Kwon was found within 72 hours. The Chungsan group, faced with the collapse of their operation and the survival of the man they had contracted against, withdrew their position quietly and without acknowledgement, the way organizations like that absorbed failure by pretending the attempt had belonged to someone else. The estate's security architecture was rebuilt from its foundation. New protocols, new personnel. Every layer examined with the kind of thoroughness that arrives only after trust has been revealed as a structural flaw. Min-Gyu handled each piece with the same cold precision he had always used. The decisions were clean, the outcomes were controlled. To anyone observing from the outside, nothing had changed. But the guards noticed something. It was difficult to name, a slight alteration in the way he moved through the compound, a fraction less tension in the set of his jaw, a quality in his silences that had shifted from compressed to something closer to considered. Mrs. O noticed it too, though she said nothing, because Mrs. O had survived in that house by understanding precisely when observation required no commentary. Something in him had been set down. What exactly and where was not a question anyone in the estate was positioned to ask. Esther's recall came on a Thursday. Formal, terse, non-negotiable. Her cover was blown, her mission unresolved by any metric her agency recognized, and her unauthorized intervention had produced the kind of outcome that organizations like hers found deeply inconvenient. She was expected to present herself for debriefing within 48 hours. She packed her bag with the same efficiency she had brought to everything else. The single small bag she had arrived with, it weighed almost nothing, the same as it always had. She was crossing the room toward the door when he appeared in the doorway. He was not blocking it. His posture was not the posture of a man issuing a prevention. He stood to one side, which she understood was a deliberate choice, because every position he occupied in a room was deliberate. He held out the mission documents intact, unburned, exactly as she had left them on the table between them, and beneath them, a single sheet of paper she had not seen before. She looked at it. It was a contract, her name at the top, not a household position, not a cover, a security consultant with terms left entirely blank except for one line at the bottom, a line reserved for the party who would be setting the conditions. He said 3 words. "Name your terms." She stood in the doorway of that room and looked at the contract, and then she looked at him, and outside the window behind him Busan stretched in the late afternoon light, the harbour, the coast road, the city that held its complications without apology, full of things that had not yet been decided. She picked up her bag. She picked up the contract. She walked past him into the corridor without a word, the same way she had walked through this house for 93 days, unhurried, giving nothing away. He did not follow. He stood in the empty doorway and listened to her footsteps move down the corridor, and he did not call after her, and he did not send anyone to intercept her, and he let the sound diminish until the house was quiet again. For the first time in 10 years, he let someone leave without needing to know the outcome in advance. The silence that remained was different from every silence that had come before it. It was not a silence he had imposed. It was not a silence built from control or distance or the suppression of something unresolved. It was simply what remained when a man finally stopped filling every empty space with the weight of his own damage. It was perhaps the beginning of something, or the end of something else. The story does not decide that for you. It leaves you here at the threshold, the same way he was left, with a choice that belongs entirely to whoever is holding it. Before you go, drop a comment. Was Esther wrong to step in front of that bullet for a man who punished her every single day? Should she have let the mission run its course? I genuinely want to know where you stand on that. If this story hit differently for you, hit the like button, it helps more people find it. And subscribe because this world is not finished yet.